Everyone else was having a brat summer. I was having a YA summer. I got my library card and I was like, I'm going to read YA. He does weird stuff, like drugs and peeping on people. Simple line, really, but it meant everything to me. Did you think the American prison system could get worse? Guess what? It got worse in this world. It is so much worse. Hi, it's me. Someone you've never met before. It's me. My name is Anna. I'm your book club partner. And today I'm going to be ranking all the 24 books that I read in 2024. 2024 was a pretty good reading year. I read the most amount of books I've ever read in a year. Shout out to the library and my 12-year-old Kindle. Anyway, I'm going to be ranking the 24 books that I read in 2024 from 3 stars to 5 stars and how much I liked them all. Let's get it started. Starting off with the one book of poetry I read this year. It's incredibly short, but that book of poetry is Thirst by Mary Oliver. I kind of read this for a class just because I thought I was going to use it, but I didn't, so I kind of just read an 88-page book of poetry for no real reason. It was fine. I'm just not a big poetry person, so it's hard for me to have opinions on poetry. That was spot number 24. 24 goes to Thirst by Mary Oliver. Honorary mention. Honestly, maybe this would go below 24, but I didn't read enough of this book to count it toward my reading goal, and that book is Paradise Lost by John Milton. I'm an English major, fun fact. This was for my English class this fall. We barely even read half of this, which, thank God. I would lose my mind trying to read all of this. It was insanely hard to get into. It's I literally had to try not to fall asleep the first few times I tried to read it. It got better, but it's I'm trying to read more classics. I own quite a few from high school that I didn't read. But this kind of classic, epic poetry is not my favorite. Parts of it were interesting, especially our discussions in class about it, but it's so hard to understand. And maybe that's a skill issue, maybe that's a me problem, but that's okay. So yeah, honorary mention to Paradise Lost, but like I said, I didn't read enough of it for it to count this year. And spot 23 is another book I read for an English class. This was in February or something, and that book is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. This is the story of Catherine and Heathcliff. They're insufferable people. I have mixed feelings on this book. I think I gave this 3.5 stars. I'd probably give it more of a 3. Kind of like with Paradise Lost, our conversations about it were interesting, but the actual book was just not for me. Wuthering Heights is a pretty divisive. It's a pretty divisive classic, I think. I see why. I didn't love it, and I didn't hate it. So that's why it's number 23. Next up is the very first book I read this year. So taking 22nd place for the best book this year is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. My main complaint with this book is that it's too long. This is the only book I read that's over 500 pages this year, which is kind of sad. But yeah, I just feel like this is so long. I don't think it needed to be this long. I think this is also pretty hit or miss for people. It was mostly a miss for me. Being in Coriolanus Snow's head sucked. I did not enjoy it. Well, technically, I tried reading this in 2020 when it came out, but my life was not great back then. So, I couldn't finish it. I think I got to the zoo and I stopped there 4 years ago. But so I did finish it this time because last winter break I reread all of the Hunger Games trilogy. I love them. I love the Hunger Games. I read them when I was 11, which might be a little young, but whatever. And this one, I saw the movie first, which I think helped a lot, because if I hadn't seen the movie first, I wouldn't know what was coming next. And I think knowing what was coming next helped a lot, because otherwise I might not have been able to do it. Moving on from that to number 21, the books I read this year. This is the only other book I read for an English class this year. And this was in the same class that I read Paradise Lost for. And here, this is a very, very different book. This is Signs Preceding the End of the World by Yuri Herrera. This is a very short, it's like literally only 100 pages. It's a short story about, a lot of it's about like border policy between Mexico and the US, except they never call it Mexico or America. It's like, we know that it is, but they never say that it is, and that's kind of fun. This is like, I think it's an okay book, but again, the discussions we had in class about it were my favorite part. I really liked talking about this book with people, and also the professor did a really good job teaching it. It was not what I would normally go for. I'm definitely not the type to read like kind of weird literary contemporary fiction about transculturation and language and border patrol and all this stupid stuff around the border. I learned some heinous things about the border when we started this unit, and oh my god, I'm not getting into that. It was good. It was just really short, and it just wasn't really my thing. Yeah, interesting to talk about. Next up is my first library book of the year. I'll hold up my Kindle that says I need to connect wirelessly, even though I think I am connected to Wi-Fi. Oh, I'm not connected to Wi-Fi. That's weird. Anyway, I haven't even told you what book it is. Let me tell you what book it is. That book is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. I, for a long time, was really apprehensive about reading this because I was like, oh, it's a popular YA fantasy, and I think I've kind of aged out of that group, even though an upcoming book is a YA fantasy. But you know, I was really apprehensive to read The Cruel Prince, but then one of my favorite booktubers, the Book Leo, she loves this series, and she convinced me. She convinced me, and I read it, and I enjoyed it. The first book is my least favorite. I think I rated this 3.5 stars. I thought this was a really solid start to the series. I just liked the other two more. I think if I were to read fae fantasy, this is what I would want. The type of fae fantasy where they are mean, they are violent, and they are not all drop dead gorgeous. Even though, like, Carden is, but, like, there's a lot of diversity in the world of Elfame. I don't know how to say that. I think it's Elfame, so I'm gonna say it's Elfame. I really liked the world. It was fun. I did not enjoy bits in the human world, but you'll hear about that in 2 places. This was also, it just felt so nostalgic to the YA I read when I was younger. Because I fell in love with reading with Throne of Glass. I was 10 years old when I read Throne of Glass. That is probably a little ridiculous. But shout out Throne of Glass for making me a reader, I guess. Or like really getting me into reading when I was 10. Yeah, it just reminded me of the stuff I read in middle school. And that was awesome. The main reason book 1 is at the bottom of the 3 is that there were things about the writing that bothered me in the first book that I think I just got used to for the rest of the series. It's mainly like the descriptions and stuff, and I was like, it's kind of cliche, but I think I just got used to it. For the other books, do not go into this thinking that this is a romance. It's not. The romance takes a back seat, at least until book 2. So if you're here for the romance, Carden's not even in this book that much, okay? And I love Carden. He's a great character. He's not in this book as much. This is a book mostly about introducing the reader to Jude in the world and all that jazz. So yeah, that's the end of my 3 stars. We're reaching 19 and we're already into the 4 stars. So yeah, good reading year. I'm so proud of myself. Moving on into 4-star territory. Number 19, we have a short story collection. I think this is probably the first short story collection I've ever read. I read this because of an English class. It wasn't required reading. We read 2 stories from this collection. I'm like, I want to check out the rest. And it was weird, but it's good. And that short story collection is Jesus' Son by Dennis Johnson. These are a wild bunch of short stories. They're all cohesive. They're all following the same character as the narrator. His name is Fuckhead. That's the only name he's given. He does weird stuff, like drugs and peeping on people. It's just so weird. Kind of unsettling. But it was really fun, and I read it in like a day or two. It's 150-ish pages. I think it's really good. And hopefully I will read more short story collections this year. Hopefully. Okay. Next up, number 18. The Queen of Nothing by Holly Black. This is the third book in the Cruel Prince trilogy. I think this honestly might be a lot of people's favorite book in the series, but for whatever reason, it's not. It's not my favorite. I don't know why I liked this less than book 2. I think it's because the first few chapters are in the human world, and the human world is so much more boring. I thought it was a really good ending to the series, though. I'd probably be interested in checking out, like, The Stolen Heir and other stuff, maybe. I don't know. I thought this was a good end to the series. I thought it was really good. Next up, number 17. An appearance of one of my favorite authors. She's at number 17. I'd be a little surprised if you've heard of this author, but if you have, speak to me. I love her books. Number 17, we have Ghostsmith by Nikki Pauprito. This author wrote my one of my favorite, at least YA fantasy series. She wrote the Crown of Feathers trilogy, which is a trilogy that I love and that I also haven't finished because the third book is really long and I, for some reason, didn't finish it. Crown of Feathers is a really good fantasy series about phoenixes. If you're tired of dragons, read about phoenixes. Anyway, let's talk about Ghostsmith. That's what I'm supposed to be talking about. This is the sequel, the second book, the final book in the Bonesmith duology. It's YA fantasy. She has bone magic. It's really fun. I was obsessed with the first book. I read the first book in October of 2023. I loved the first book. I thought it was so good. Ghostsmith just didn't hit the same way. I don't know why. I just wasn't as into it as the first book. Don't know why. Next up is number 16. We have The Wicked King by Holly Black. This is the second book in the Cruel Prince trilogy and my favorite. I think the main reason I love this one is because of the drama. There is so much drama in this one and I love it. This is like, honestly, a lot of the Cruel Prince is kind of like a court drama. Not like court, like Judge Judy court, but like fairy court. This is, I think the third book probably has a little more, like, politics in it. This one I just really liked this one. There's a lot of Jude and Carden in this one, and I love them both. I think they're both incredible characters. I just think they're really fun, and their chemistry is really good. Even when they hate each other. Yeah, this is my favorite book in the series. Yeah. The Wicked King by Holly Black, number 16. Up next, number 15. How have we only gone through 9 books so far? This is a book that I read in one day during finals week of spring term. I think both my roommates had already left, and I still had a final I needed to stick around for, and I had this book, and I read it in a day instead of studying for my psychology final, and it was awesome. And that book is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana. This is just fun. It's so cute. It's a really fun, cozy, contemporary fantasy. The main character's a witch. She ends up at this house where there's 3 young witches and some human guardians. And they bring her... The main character's name is Micah. I'd say Mika. They bring in Mika to teach these young witches how to use their powers, and she's like really apprehensive about it because she's been told all her life that witches cannot gather in one place, otherwise bad things will happen. It's just really cute. It's really sweet. The romance between her and the other guy, Jamie. He's fun. They have a cute romance. The three girls are so cute. I thought they were dynamic. Like the five of them, like Mika, Jamie. Oh, I definitely don't remember the girls' names. I read this book 6 months ago. Um, their dynamic reminded me of the dynamic in Despicable Me with Gru, the girls, and Lucy. Very similar, and that made it very enjoyable. It was the perfect thing to read when procrastinating on studying. Number 14. We're still in 4 stars, except I initially gave this next book 5 stars, but it does not deserve that. Anyway, the next book is Two Twisted Crowns by Rachel Gillig. This is the second book in the Shepherd King duology. I cannot remember what the series was actually called. The first book in this series duology is One Dark Window. You'll see it later. Two Twisted Crowns is the sequel. It's the finale. I thought it was really good. I had a lovely reading experience. I read this in a couple days at the beach with my mom, and we stayed up until like 2 a.m. one night reading. It was awesome. Yeah, I had a really good experience reading this. Like, I read it super fast. I was super, like, in it. I was engrossed. I was enthralled. But then looking back, I was like, it was not as... It is not 5 stars. It's good, but it's not 5 stars, you know? In this book, because of the ending of the first book, we have different POV chapters. The first book is entirely in the perspective of Elspeth, the main character. She's in this book less because of reasons that I won't give away because of spoilers. But we spend a lot of the book in other characters' narrations, and my main bone to pick is that I did not agree with the characterization of Elm. That is fully a personal, me taste thing. I thought in the first book he read a lot more queer, and then he was very, very straight. In this book, I was like, oh, okay. That's just me. That's a lesbian flag up there. I think you can see at least part of it. Sometimes I just think that some characters are gay and then they're not, and I'm like, oh, okay. That was a really solid ending to the duology. I just kind of wish there was more of an epilogue. Like, I don't think the epilogue was very long, and I kind of wish we got more of it, you know? I'll probably say this about the first book too, but the Nightmare is my favorite character. He's awesome. There's this one line somewhere in the book that the Nightmare and Elspeth see something with two of the other characters, and Elspeth is like, oh, it seems we've missed something. I think the Nightmare says, small blessings. And it's so funny. I just really love the Nightmare. He's an awesome character. And he doesn't even have a physical form. That's awesome. Number 13. Appropriately 13, because this book is scary. Is a YA dystopian horror. No, let me phrase that better. Is a queer YA horror dystopian. It's fantastic and the grossest, goriest thing I've ever read in my life. And that book is Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White. This is an incredible book. Incredibly terrifying. Hell Followed With Us is a book about a boy named Benji, trans boy named Benji, who was chosen to be the martyr for the apocalypse. They're living in the apocalypse of the plague from the Bible was scientifically brought into the world, and Benji is supposed to be the martyr sacrifice thing. Benji is trans. He runs away. He ends up joins, what's it called? The city's LGBTQ plus center, where he hangs out with a bunch of queer teens, and they go through tragedy, and it's really sad and scary, and the religious trauma and themes in this book are crazy off the walls. This was a really cool apocalyptic story. It was horrifying, like I said. This would have been 5 stars, but something about the ending felt really off to me. I think the ending felt abrupt and rushed and like too short. I don't know why. Like, I love a lot of the book. It's really, really, really good book. So yeah, number 13, Hell Followed With Us. You should read this. It's so good. Next up, we have... I have a whole section of this list that's apparently just about queer non-binary main characters. It starts with Hell Followed With Us and it lasts for the next 3 books. The next book is part of another duology that I read this year on my Kindle, but I got physical copies for Christmas. And that book at spot number 12 is A Prayer for the Crown Shy by Becky Chambers. This is the second book in the Monk and Robot series. It's like a cozy sci-fi. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's very popular and very good. It's popular for good reason. I don't know why, it just hit less. It did not hit as hard as the first one. I don't know why, except the ending. I finished this book. I actually read this in one sitting. I think that's the best way to consume this series. A Psalm for the Wild Built, which is, spoilers, is next on this list. I read it in chunks during my breaks at work, and I wish I just read it all at once. I think that's the best way to read this book. But reading A Prayer for the Crown Shy all at once was perfect. And I felt really sad when it was over. I'm not sure if there's going to be more books in the series. There had better be. Let me tell you, there had better be more books in the series. I want to never leave this. I will follow Dex and Mosscap to the ends of the earth. They're such a good duo. I love it. This is just a really wholesome story. And I don't know why I like this one less. It's marginally less. It's really good. You should read it. Next book, like I said, is The Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. This is the first book. I like it better for some reason. It just hit. It is so good. The bit where at the end Mosscap just says something like, anyway, Mosscap, the robot, says something along the lines of, because I know no matter what, I am wonderful. And I love that. I don't know why I love that line so much, but I do. In case you don't know, in case you haven't heard of this, I know I didn't describe the second book, but the Monk and Robot series is a sci-fi following a non-binary monk, T-monk named Dex, and they have a bit of a existential crisis and they decide to switch, which god they follow or something. They decide to become a traveling T-monk instead of whatever they were doing before. And so they struggle with that, and then they end up then they have another crisis, and they end up going off the road, which is weird in this world. They end up going off the road into this forest, and they end up finding a robot named Splendid Speckled Mosscap. And humans haven't seen robots in centuries, I think. Again, really good. My foot is asleep. I love this series. Like I said, I really hope there's more. Yeah, that's the end of the 4 stars. Okay, I gave this 4 stars, but this is one of my favorite books I read this year. Just because I enjoyed it so much. I don't know. I just loved it. Also, the covers on these books. Are you kidding me? They're gorgeous. I love them. Especially this one. Very pretty. Anyway. Moving on. Last 10 books. Here we go. We're also reaching the 4.5 stars. So we have 5 4.5 stars and then 5 5 stars. The first book in the 4.5 star category is my first ever memoir. It's the end of our little trans non-binary main character narrator segment. That memoir is All Boys Aren't Blue by George Johnson. This is a YA memoir, which I didn't know was a thing. I think the main reason it's YA is because it's targeted towards younger readers. Younger than me, which is the main reason it doesn't get 5 stars, but this was so good. You've probably heard of it. If anything, you've at least seen the gorgeous cover. This is a really good memoir about the writer, George M. Johnson. This was a really good memoir to start with. It's a lot of it is about like dark topics like racism or homophobia or transphobia. But each chapter always ends on such like an uplifting, hopeful note that like I would often end the chapters like smiling. This is just such like an easily digestible memoir. I think everyone should read it because if anything, memoirs are for reading about experiences that aren't like your own. And this is a really good experience to know about. I think this is most important to young queer black people, but I'm not, well, I am young, but I think this is more for like teenagers. I am queer, but I'm not non-binary. I'm obviously not black, and it's just such an important thing to like read the like perspective and experience of. And even, yeah, like I said, parts of it are dark. Parts of it are upsetting. But it is ultimately a really hopeful and uplifting memoir that I think everyone should read. Next up, number 9, is the last... No, sorry. I think One Dark Window is technically a YA, but this is the last YA book on this list. I read... Half the books I read this year were adult, which is new. I don't normally read adult, and then this year I was like, you know what, I'm turning 20 this year, I'm gonna read adult books. And so like half the books I read this year were adult. Anyway, that was a side tangent. Next up is another YA fantasy, a really good one. Number 9 is Heartless by Marissa Meyer. She's the author who wrote the Lunar Chronicles, which is way up on my top shelf up there. That I never finished that series, even though I love it. It's really good. I just never finished it for some reason. And Heartless is basically the backstory for the Queen of Hearts. It's not connected to the Lunar Chronicles. The only way it is that it's kind of a fairy tale retelling. I think the action's really fun. The romance is really fun. It made me hopeful that the inevitable wouldn't happen. I was like, oh, she won't turn evil. Except I know who this is the story for, so I knew how it was gonna go. It was really fun. A lot of it was pretty suspenseful, especially the parts where is it actually the Jabberwock? I think they call it the Jabberwock, which is, a character monster from C.S. Lewis? No, Lewis Carroll. And the parts with the Jabberwock were fun and interesting and suspenseful and kind of scary. And the story was just really immersive. Like, you could tell this is set in Wonderland. And it was really cool. It made me want to watch the Tim Burton live-action Alice in Wonderland movies, which I've only seen once. I haven't watched it since then. But, it gives those vibes. It's really good. I think I initially gave it 5 stars, but, like, compared to the other 5 stars, it's 4.5. But it's still really enjoyable, nostalgic of old YA that I used to read, and it's really good. If you haven't read Marissa Meyer, try something. This one at least is a standalone, so you could read Heartless and not have to be like, oh, there's a whole series. And it's also not sci-fi, so it's probably a little easier to understand. Anyway, Heartless by Marissa Meyer, number 9. Very good. Very good. My foot's gonna fall asleep again if I keep sitting like this. Next up, we have an adult fantasy by one of my favorite authors. It's not Nikki Palprito. She doesn't have any adult books. No, we're talking about The Queen's new release from April last year. This year. Well, it is 2025. Happy New Year, by the way. I hope 2025 is going well for everyone out there. Number 8 is The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. I haven't read Ninth House or Hellbent, Leigh Bardugo's other adult books. I haven't read those, so I don't know how The Familiar compares to those in terms of like how she writes adult. But I love Six of Crows. It's my favorite like duology ever. And I cannot believe this is the same woman that wrote Six of Crows. This feels so different. In case you don't know what this is about, I'm sorry I've only been giving summaries for like half of these books. I apologize for that. Anyway, in case you don't know what this is about a young woman named Lucia in 1500s Spain. Side note, I'm learning Spanish, and I love literally anything that has Spanish or Spanish culture in it. It's, okay, not anything, but it's still like, I really enjoyed it. It was fun. It's a fantasy. It's historical, set in Spain. It follows this kind of peasant girl, Lucia, who has magic that isn't really explained. Sorry. And then she ends up being mentored by this dude named Santanhel. He's immortal and kind of a demon. Kind of not. She ends up in a tournament in the hopes that she could gain a position of power so that she can't be powerless anymore. It's good. It is very good. I have two main gripes with it. I have a lot of negative things to say about it, even though it is literally number 8 on this list. It's up pretty high. I gave it 4.5 stars. My two main gripes were the ending and the magic. I'll start with the magic system. I just felt like it wasn't explained a whole lot, because Lucia is Jewish. That's mainly where she gets her magic from, but it's never explained how she has magic, why she has magic, who in the world can have magic, and like, I couldn't really tell what her magic was for. It was like she could do stuff. She could perform miracles, or I should remember what they're called. I want to say muñecas. It's like, that's doll. Why is it not listed? Anyway, sorry. Lucia can perform little miracles, but I don't understand what they're for or why. I just felt like the magic could have been better explored and explained. And then the ending, I'm not gonna spoil it, but I think she should have gone all the way with the ending. I don't think they should have had that escape at the end, to be honest. That would have been more impactful if the thing that was supposed to happen did happen. I feel like that honestly would have been a better ending. And like, the magical like competition tournament thing is not, it's kind of brief, but it also takes up like half the book maybe. It's just weird. The writing is really good, as expected with Bardugo. The writing's really good. Like, it is a really good book. I just have my gripes with it. More than other books, like, around this spot. But it was just good. So yeah, number 8, The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. Next up, another adult fantasy. Another adult historical fantasy. That book is The Adventures of Amina al-Sirafi by Shannon Chakraborty. This was so fun. Let me tell you, I had a blast reading this. It was so fun. I haven't read any fantasies that take place in like South Asia or the Middle East, and it was so... The setting, the first half of this book is incredible. I loved the first half. I loved all the characters, especially Amina, the main character. She was an awesome protagonist. I loved her. She's a middle-aged woman who has a bad back, or bad knee, bad back. She's trying to save someone's daughter because she feels so, like, motherly because she has her own daughter. It's just really good. The characters and the world were so awesome. I loved it. It's a pirate book. It's such a good pirate book. Made me realize I'm writing a pirate book, and my pirate book isn't very piratey, but whatever. But the second half of this book takes a turn. It goes crazy. The second half of this book goes way into the fantasy aspect of the historical fantasy, to the point that it feels a little ridiculous. But it was fun ridiculous. I still had a lot of fun. Really enjoyable. I loved it a lot. If you want, like, just an absolute whale of a time, if you just want to have fun reading a fantasy that's not like that's not like every other like European inspired fantasy, read this one. This one's good. It's very good. Number 6, we're almost to the top 5. I teased this earlier. because I talked about the sequel, but I haven't talked about this one. Number 6 is One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. Read this on my Kindle. Obviously, that's why I haven't been holding up physical copies of some books, by the way. It's because I read them from the library on my Kindle. One Dark Window is a really great gothic atmospheric fantasy with a magic system centered around cards. And I love that. And kind of like The Cruel Prince, but in a different way, it reminded me of the fantasy that I read as a teenager. And if you could make me nostalgic, that's a good thing. I thought the pacing was really good in this book. I thought there's a scene around the climax that was so tense and epic. I was like, oh, epic. It was really small scale, but it was so tense. It was really good. Again, I loved the nightmare and his dynamic with Elspeth. That was my favorite part. I did have one small problem with this book that either went away in the second book or I was just used to it by the second book, was that certain details were repeated so much. Like, I know that Raven's full name is Raven Yu. I know that he has black hair. I know that he has gray eyes. I know that he's captain of the Destriers. You don't need to tell me for the millionth time. That was it. That was the main problem I had. But it just, details like that get repetitive. I thought it was great. A really good fantasy. Loved it a lot. Moving on to the 5 stars in my top 5 books. Let's get it. Look at my dog. This is my dog. Say hi, Konya. Hi. Wait, can you lay down, please? Anyway, we're back from the distraction from my dog. Number 5 is a speculative historical fiction. Also one of the more horrifying things I read this year, but not because of it is because of violence, but not because of monsters or anything. That book is Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. This is at number 5, my 5th favorite book of the year. This is a really difficult book to read. I don't know if this is how popular this is compared to Octavia Butler's other books, but this is the first book of hers that I've read. It's incredible and horrifying. In case you don't know what this is about Dana, a black woman from her modern day is the 70s. But through some thing, I don't really remember. I read this in like April or March, so it's been a while. But she ends up going back in time to the era of slavery. And the only reason she's brought back in time is because she needs to save this white boy's life multiple times. It's a horrifying depiction of slavery. It is really difficult to read, like I said, but it is so good. It is incredible. I think all 5 of my top books are pretty dark. This one is really difficult and uncomfortable to read, but it's so important and it's incredibly well written. Dana is such a complex main character. I'm gonna keep saying really good, incredible, fantastic. Read this book. Even if it's difficult to get through, because I know it is, especially reading it as a white person. It is really uncomfortable to read, but that's why you need to read it. That is exactly why. The next 3 books are books that I don't own. Two of them were my last 2 books of the year, but not this next one. Coming in at number 4 is Juniper and Thorn by Ava Reed. This was beautiful and horrifying. I loved the atmosphere in this book. The characters were interesting and complex. The setting was horrifying. The horror was horrifying. And it was just so tense and perfectly atmospheric, and I loved it to pieces. I know this can be a pretty divisive book. It's not for everyone. This really requires checking trigger warnings on this one, but I thought it was done really well. I thought it was really, really good. And I have more Ava Reed books. Neither of them are here. They're both at college, and I haven't read either of them. I need to. I just haven't read them yet. But yeah, it's not for everyone. Check the trigger warnings, but it was for me. I thought it was incredible. Next up, number 3, which honestly is tied with number 2, to be honest. This is my most recent read of the year, and I have not finished the sequel yet. I don't know why, I've just been reading it really slowly. Anyway, number 3, taking bronze for my favorite book slash I'll say best book of the year. Because best doesn't always mean favorite. Like I said, Song for the Wild Boat is one of my favorite books, but it's not in the top 10. Number 3 is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. This is an intense adult fantasy, but not in the type of way that you probably think of most adult fantasies. This is like, the magic in this world is centered around geology and the earth, and that's so cool. It's so interesting and fun to learn about and read about. The world is incredibly the world in this book is incredibly fleshed out, and it is honestly one of the best fantasies I've ever read. It is like peak craft. Like, the narration of this book is really cool. One of the POV, there's 3 main POVs, and one of them is we're using you as the subject pronoun for the like POV character, and it breaks the fourth wall to the reader, but is it really to the reader or is it to a character? I don't know. I won't say anything else than that. But a narration is incredible for all 3 POVs. I loved them all a lot. In case you're curious, my favorite POV to read about was Sienite. I just thought that was peak. It was really good. I think I've been introduced to the 3 POVs in the second book by now, and I'm scared for one of them. Anyway, The Fifth Season is, I don't even really know how to describe it. I just think you need to read it. Like I said, it's a fantasy with magic based around geology in the earth. And it has a really interesting commentary on, class. The history of this world's really cool. It's just really cool. You need to read it. Read The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, please. It is, parts of it is trigger warnings. Look up the trigger warnings. But it's so incredibly well done. This is, like I said, peak of craft. As, a writer myself, I pay attention to craft quite a bit. And this is phenomenal. Alright. Now we have 2 left. Ow. My body does not like me sitting on the floor for this long. Number 2. Oh my god. What a book. This next book is another book you need to read. Another book that's incredibly important. In similar ways that Kindred is. It's kind of like, honestly, Kindred if it was modern, and way more graphic. And Kindred's pretty graphic. But anyway, number 2 is Chain Gang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. Where do I begin? Well, I guess here's the super simple introduction. Chain Gang All-Stars is very adult. This requires so many trigger warnings. Please look them up if you're going to read this, which you should. You should read this. Anyway, this is an adult, futuristic dystopian. That's the main genre it would fit into is dystopian or speculative fiction. It is disturbing as hell. Really disturbing. Did you think the American prison system could get worse? Guess what? It got worse in this world. It is so much worse. It is horrific. The main themes of this book is around incarceration, and at least the main characters, they are prisoners, and they are willingly participating in these games, this sport. But basically, prisoners in America can sign a form to join this chain, which is a group of prisoners from different prisons, and they have to kill other people for America's entertainment. And oh boy, this is a really experimental book in terms of, again, craft and narration, especially with narration. So most of the book is in third person past tense. Most chapters are like that. But in some chapters, you will jump between people's heads, and you won't even really know until you're like, this seems like someone else's thoughts. There are some chapters that are in first person and present tense. And it's so incredible. This book uses footnotes, which is honestly, the main reason I wish I had a physical copy, because on my Kindle, like, I would see, like, oh, there's a number next to it, and that means there's a footnote, but I wouldn't get to see the footnotes until the end of the chapter. But the footnotes were used really well. They're either used as, like, extended narration that, like, wouldn't exactly fit into the, like, main narration of the chapter, but it's kind of like, yeah, just added bits of absolutely gut-wrenching narration, or about real-world statistics and, like, rates on violence towards people of color, because most characters in this book are people of color, or, like, just stats about the prison system, and it makes it so much worse. It's very violent. This book took me the longest out of all books I read this year. This book took me 3 weeks, or just about 3 weeks. Most books take me 1 to 2 weeks, or 1 day if you're irregular witches. But yeah, this one took me a really long time to read, because it's really difficult to read, but it's so engaging and horrifying. And it reaches a point where, kind of like with the Hunger Games, it brings up an interesting moral question of how much are you allowed to enjoy this? Because you are still reading about a legalized sport where people murder each other on television and people go nuts over it. Also, there are some chapters from POVs of, like, fans, and honestly, those are some of the most horrifying chapters. Really, this is a really, like, incredible, horrifying depiction of just how bad the American prison system could be. And it is already bad. And it could be worse. And I just really hope nothing like this ever happens. And then, like, also a big theme in this book is, like, empathy. Because all the main characters are criminals. They are in prison. But the, like, personal plot lines around them, but also the plot lines around them, like, in, like, the actual universe. Like, empathy for people who have done horrible things, but they are honestly in worse situations now. Stuff like that. Chain Gang All-Stars, you need to read it if you can stomach it. It's incredibly important and incredibly well done. It's so good. Look at, like, the 5th season. I think this is, like, peak craft. But anyway, that was number 2, our silver medalist. And up next, we have my favorite book of the year by a long shot. When I was making this list, I knew that this was going to be at number 1, no matter what. Even though, like, I think the 5th season in Chain Gang All-Stars are incredible. They're so good. They're in 2nd and 3rd for a reason. This is my number 1. Just in my heart, in my soul, this is my number 1. And it's another memoir. I don't think any other memoir will be as good as this one. But anyway. And that memoir is In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. Oh my god! When I tell you this is my favorite book of the year, I'm so serious. Everything about this meant so much to me. And again, an experience not like my own, but similar enough that I was like, oh my god. In case you haven't heard of this is an incredibly popular memoir. And an incredibly heartbreaking one. And an incredibly well-crafted one. It's me going off about the craft again. Try not to be a writer challenge. This is a memoir about Carmen Maria Machado's experience in an abusive queer relationship with another woman. This is my yeah, oh my god. I can't even put thoughts together. This book changed me. This book changed me. This book distracted me from doing my homework. Like, I would literally be sitting in my dorm room doing my homework, and this would be sitting on my bed, like, 3 feet away, and I'd be like, don't pick it up, don't pick it up, don't pick it up. It's so... oh my god. All my notes are literally nonsensical, like, best book. It's so important. Loved it. This is also one of the best books I've ever read in my life. Some of the lines, dude, stole my breath away. Namely, this one. Because, you know, gotta relate to something in memoirs, and oh my god. When I think about him just sitting there with his brand new fist under his brand new chin, looking vaguely perturbed and puzzled and anxious, I feel a lot of sympathy. Putting language to something for which you have no language is no easy feat. Simple line, really, but it meant everything to me. I read that and I was literally like, I read that and I just put the book down and stared into the middle distance for a couple seconds, probably for like a whole minute, being like, oh my god. Because sometimes you need to read about things that are similar to what you've experienced. Mine was nowhere near as bad. Do not get it twisted. Another book that was experimental in craft. No transition there, sorry. I loved the experimentation with form in this book. Like, look at this. There's a chapter that is 1 sentence long. Also, do you want to hear what the sentence is on this random chapter that I flipped to? Most types of domestic abuse are completely legal. That is a whole sentence, the whole paragraph, the whole chapter. Footnotes are also used in this book, kind of in a way similar to Chain Gang All-Stars. Many of them are just like references to what the like stat is from, but other footnotes are like narration. Speaking of narration, so this is the writer writing about abuse that she experienced in the past. And when she is writing chapters of like the events that happened in that relationship, she uses you instead of I, because she treats it like she is talking to herself, and also using you puts the reader directly in it, puts you directly in that experience. And ooh. Yeah, most chapters are really short. There are some longer chapters that specifically delve into like facts and statistics about domestic abuse and same-sex relationships. Like, there are chapters that are like mini essays. And it's just incredible. My thought, this segment is probably incomprehensible. I apologize. Ugh. I also think everyone should read this. Because not all queer relationships are perfect. Some of them could be like this. Some of them could be like the ones that she describes in the essay-like chapters. These are real things that happen to real people. Don't forget that. Yeah, this was my second ever memoir. I read my first 2 memoirs ever this year. Not sure anything will beat this one. Yeah. This is my favorite book of the year. Definitely in my top 10 books of all time. Maybe even top 5. I don't know what my top 5 or 10 books would be, but this is certainly on there. Anyway, that's my books. That was all 24 books that I read in 2024. Like I said, I wanted it to be 25, but I'm currently reading The Obelisk Gate, which is the second book in the 5th season series. And on my little Kindle, I'm literally in the 3rd chapter. I'm 12% of the way in. Also, do you know what I hate? I assume this happens on other Kindles and not just my Kindle because it's 12 years old. But I hate when you're reading an ebook and it doesn't show you what page you're on. It just shows the location. What is that supposed to give me? That doesn't give me anything. That gives me nothing. Anyway, my takeaway from this year is that if you have a library card, use it. You will read so much more if you borrow from the library. Because, like, I have a ton of books, and I haven't read a lot of these books. But it's so much, for some reason, it's a lot harder to pick something off of a shelf and physically read it. But when it's on a Kindle, and you can borrow it from the library, you don't have to pay for it. You have to wait 4 months for them sometimes. Another book that I have on here that I haven't even started. Read from your library, support your libraries this year, and also support, like, indie booksellers, not just Barnes & Noble. Barnes & Noble scares me. Any other thoughts? Maybe I should talk about books I really want to read this year. This year, I really want to read more. I want to read more authors of color. I read my last 2 books of the year were both by Black authors, and absolutely incredible. I want to read longer books. Like I said, Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes was my longest book last year. And it's like barely over 500 pages. No, I could read. I have Priory of the Orange Tree up here. I'm not ready to read that, actually. Yeah, I read a lot of adult this year. I had a YA summer. Everyone else was having a brat summer. I was having a YA summer. I got my library card and I was like, I'm going to read YA. And then I started reading more adult in the fall and winter. I'd love to read more memoirs. I have, what's her name? I don't have it here. I have it at school. I'm Glad My Mom Died by, why can't I remember what her name is? I mean, I didn't watch iCarly or anything. But anyway, I have that memoir. Other books I want to read more Ava Reed. I don't know, maybe read more classics outside of class. That might be asking for a lot, but, you know. Anyway, thank you for coming. I hope this isn't obscenely long, but we'll see. Thank you for being here. Thank you for stopping by the book lab. I'm Anna, and I wish you a happy new year and a good 2025. Bye!